Hi, I'm Tim, and welcome back to Harbinger. I'm here today with Zou Jia, CTO of OYO China. Welcome, Zou Jia.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'd love to start off with our friends and folks who are not too familiar with OYO and OYO China. Can you tell us a bit about your background and why you joined OYO?
Well, I grew up in Beijing. I went to the US when I was 15, did my high school and college in Minnesota, and then went down to do a PhD at Berkeley. So that was too much time spent at school, I guess. After that, I did 3 years at Google as a software engineer. I figured out I didn't want to be in academia, I wanted to be building stuff. I was working on Google Wallet, which was more or less, you can say, a failed product, I guess, but I learned all the engineering techniques, how to build engineering culture and all that stuff. So I think that really set the foundation for me as an engineer. And moving forward, I wanted to go to a smaller place where I can have bigger impact. So that's why I joined Uber. I was very lucky. The second week after I joined, Uber started a growth team in China. So I was part of that founding team. We were able to basically help the China team on the ground, operations people on the ground, and um, help the business to go from 1% market share to around 45% market share in a very short span of time. But of course, we also made a bunch of mistakes along the way, and after around 2 years, we decided to merge with Didi, right? So
Right.
that business came to an end. And then after that, I did a short stint focusing on Uber Southeast Asia. So that was fun. Traveled in a lot of Southeast Asian countries. I made a lot of friends. And the business seemed like it was growing, but also was facing the same kind of competitive pressure as we did in China. And at the same time, I came across this opportunity at Mobike back in China, and I decided that's something. One, it's really exciting, and two, it had the opportunity of me playing an even bigger role in an even smaller startup that's also trying to climb a huge growth curve, right? So I decided, like in a couple of days, that I would move back to Beijing and join Mobike. So again, rode the growth curve on that company, grew the business from, I think it was like 400K trips per day to over 20 million trips per day, much bigger than Uber's in terms of number of trips. Of course, smaller than in terms of GMV. So that was also a huge learning for me. Basically, learned how to operate a function or operate on a business executive level at Mobike. And I guess fortunately or unfortunately, that business also came to an end when Mobike was bought by Meituan in 2018. And after that, I stayed on for another 6 months to help with the transition, but I always knew that I wanted to do something even smaller, and even having an even more bigger impact. And I came across with this OYO JiuDian's opportunity. So in OYO China, we actually call it OYO JiuDian, right? Just JiuDian in the Chinese words for hotels in China, in Chinese. So just to differentiate with OYO for the rest of globe. And so I joined OYO in October of 2018, signing on as CTO, and now runs both product and engineering and data within OYO JiuDian, leading a team of around 600 people. So that's my background.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think you really nailed on the head in terms of moving from obviously academia to building products, but moving to ever smaller roles where you can have a greater and outsized impact. I'm curious, as you moved from Uber China, I believe you were straddling both the U.S. and China at the same time, and then moving into Mobike, which is back in China. What was going through your head? A lot of highway and overseas attorneys do come to China specifically for the opportunity to look for a startup and entrepreneurial opportunities. I'm curious, did you ever think that you would move back to China, or was that?
Yeah,
of your plan?
that's a really good question, right? Like I think in the back of my mind, I always knew that Beijing is the place I consider home since ever since I was very little, right? I wasn't born in Beijing, but I grew up here and I had a lot of good friends here, and the atmosphere, the culture, it just had this sense of home for me. And I always missed this while I was in the US. I always felt that something was more or less missing, that there's this belonging that I couldn't get anywhere else in this world. That has since changed a little bit, but I think that was always in the back of my mind and was one of the things that drove me to work on Uber China, for example. So at that time, I had the choice of focusing on, Uber China or something else. And to me, it was a very simple decision because I wanted to keep this connection and I wanted to have an opportunity or have a setup so that maybe later on I can come back to China. And it did happen as it turned out. I can't say I totally planned for it, but there was a seed that was planted all along the ways.
Makes sense. I think when people think of belonging, it's either moving people from A to B, such as with Uber, or getting people from last mile, like at Mobike, or having them have a place to stay, like OYO JiuDian. So, in your words, what is OYO JiuDian, and what does it mean to the Chinese consumer?
I mean, from the outside, it might look to be just another hotel chain, right? But I think the key differentiation between OYO JiuDian to the rest of our the hotel ecosystem in China is that it focuses on the everyday consumer, especially those who are not as who are not doing as well in life in terms of economics or their way of life. So this is very, very similar to the Pinduoduo model, right? So some people brand us as the Pinduoduo in the hotel industry, which has some truth in it. But I think the key similarity between OYO JiuDian and Pinduoduo is we focus on the people who live in Wuhuanwai, right? That's like Huang Zheng's key point that 消费升级, like consumer spending upgrade, is not about getting the Beijing people to live the lifestyle of those in Paris, but it's more about people living in Anhui, people living in Henan, living in small counties and small towns, and get them an experience that's more like what's currently experienced in Beijing, for example. Right, so I think that's the vision that we share, and it's a very, very exciting thing when you think about how big of a population you're impacting, right? So
yeah, that's a great point. For our listeners who aren't familiar, Anhui, etc., like Wuhanwai, are folks who live in lower tier cities who don't always have the same kind of economic spending power or access to the the more high level goods that people in Beijing and Shanghai, your first tier cities, do.
Right, but at the end of the day, they also need a place to stay at when they're traveling, right? And when their relatives come visit them, or when they're visiting their relatives, they also need a place to stay if their relatives' sofa isn't available. And for them, we want to provide the best experience possible for the cheapest value, right? And so that's the market we focus on, and that's the problem we try to solve.
It would be helpful to learn a bit more about what the marketplace dynamics look like, because I think it ties down a lot with how Chinese culture looks like with respect to how families engage with one another. So I'm curious, like taking a step back, in the US in the 90s, there were a lot of budget hotel chains that were gobbled up by Hampton Inn, and that formed like these large, massive chains. So the unlocked value was to aggregate and standardize. Is that similar approach you guys are taking in China? You mentioned the core need is the need for consumers to feel like they can also have a place to stay as well. And how is it different from competing products?
So I guess at the end of the day, it's about ROI, right? For every single RMB that's spent, what kind of experience you're gonna get, right? And no matter who you are, like having a place to stay and having roof over your head is the basics of needs. Mm-hmm. And So what we're trying to do is to get hotels to these customers with a nice, comfortable bed, and with clean toilets, and with relatively noise-free environments, right? So those are kind of the key things that we realize our customers care about. So when you walk into an OYO hotel, you won't have a fancy, lounge, like there won't be a bar, but these travelers will have a nice place to stay at the night, and I think for them that's the most important thing.
Can you share a bit more about the particular like user cohorts who use it and the use cases? For example, I know I read in OYO India, because in a lot of places where OYO India operates, electricity is not always consistent, and therefore when there's a blackout, these individuals actually go to OYO hotels to stay there because there's a consistent offering of, say, like AC, Wi-Fi, etc.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what does that look like for China? Who are the types of users and use cases?
So we have less of that in China. Our population is, even though they're not economically too advanced, they still have access to clean toiletry and ACs and all that stuff, usually at home. So that's not a main reason why people come here. But it is a good reason, for example, when you're visiting relatives, when you are going to a hospital, or when you're visiting someone near a hospital and you have to take care the elderly, and you need a place to stay at night besides the hospital. And of course, it's a place to stay if you are a business traveler, right? Business travelers in the big cities, of course, they will not choose us because the big corporations are will reimburse a lot more.
Right.
But if you're a small business guy working for a small business, then chances are that your budget isn't as big, right? So you still need a consistent experience, right? You don't want to walk into a non-named or non-chained hotel and meet something that you don't know what to expect. So OYO gives you that kind of safety and that kind of predictability that you can have in a chain hotel.
I know one of the bigger trends in China that pushes through domestic tourism is enabling domestic tourism for the older population, and they usually travel in massive buses if you've ever gone anywhere in China. And these folks tend to stay in groups at these large hotels in a lot of these hotspots throughout China.
Right. So I think that population is very interesting, right? So if you think about traveling, usually you think about, what are the key or top travel seasons, and how do hotels meet those needs? But you're totally right about the elderly population. They're much more free, and they want to avoid the traffic, so they actually go out and do their travel in during the non-peak seasons. And the second thing is that they always travel in packs, right? They always go with a travel agency because it's much harder for them to plan, and it's much harder for them to take care of each other, right? And when you go to those travel agencies, and usually if this group is not too economically advanced, right, then they will have a problem, because if you want to stay in a hotel chain, it usually costs more, right? But if you want to stay in a non-hotel chain, those hotels usually have a relatively small number of rooms, which is not possible to encompass the total population, that's total amount of people in this group, in this big bus, right? So what OYO does is that we actually work with travel agencies such that when you have this group, well, since we have a chain and we have a large number of hotels within our platform, we can actually split this group up into multiple smaller hotels. So this one gets these customers a good user experience or a good staying experience at a much cheaper price. And two, also helps these hotel owners. Before this, these hotel owners cannot take these travel agencies because of their number of rooms, but now they can because of this room sharing among these hotels.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I know you guys are now in 300 plus cities across, lower tier cities as well. And I'm curious, what have you seen as a CTO? You also look at the product side. What have you seen in terms of similarities across these different users in different cities, and how have you thought about the product in a way to fulfill these different users' needs, or do they look generally quite similar?
Well, I think the key here is that we want to make the booking experience as simple as possible. And that's actually really, really hard to do, right? If you have booked a hotel in Meituan or Ctrip, there's actually a lot of hoops you need to jump through, right? You gotta figure out the date, which seems easy at the first glance, but could still confuse you. If you think about rooms in a hotel, you might take them for granted, but there are actually many, many different types of rooms, and the pricing could always be like moving up and down on a very regular basis. So of course, we don't do that. What we do look at is to say, what is the most simple experience from the user landing on the first page to them clicking on the booking, with the pricing shown very simply, right? So we actually make a lot of assumptions based on data cohorts, based on the kind of user we have, and then have either the date or the location, all of that pre-filled, right? So when you come in, you can actually make a booking in 3 to 4 clicks, which is super simple, depending on your use case, right? So on the product side, I think it's in general really hard to make something really simple, but we try to do that by learning more about our customers and making assumptions about their behavior. And of course, at the end of booking, if you have made a mistake, if we made a wrong assumption and you didn't catch that, we have to give you a flow to help you fix this experience. But that's also another part that we focus on.
Yeah, so it really does come down to design. I was playing with the app earlier and checking out places in China as well as India and trying to understand the UI. It does look very similar to, for those listeners in the West, like a Booking or a Expedia or Kayak, but with like much less information.
Yeah.
So it's much more straight to the point and helps you get from A to Z much faster.
Yeah.
This is just like a forward-facing app product to the user who books it, and OYO China, obviously, it's more like a WeWork where it either leases or does agreements with all these hotels and has like mass training staff to help get things up to a standardization level. Can you share a bit more about like what are some other tools you guys use to manage the whole iceberg underneath what people see?
I think before that, let's take a step back, right? And I think the key point I want to make is that OYO's customer, it's two parts. It's the consumers, but it's also the hotel owners, right? There's a bunch of other users who are like, the front desk people, the hotel manager, etc. But the most important customer within OYO JiuDian system or ecosystem is the hotel owner. That's if you have to pick a single person that we care the most about, it's the hotel owner, because they are our partners, and without them, we will not be able to provide a good user experience. Without them, we will not be able to have the property to operate on. Without them, that's really where everything starts up, right? So the question is, how do we help these hotel owners achieve their goal? And their goal usually is, getting more business, getting more bookings, getting more GMV, getting more income, and then also trying to save their time or making their job easier along the way, right? So those are kind of the most important things that the hotel owners care about. So to that end, we actually built a couple of products to help them. For example, we have a product that focuses on just the owners, right? This is, all the data, aggregated data and dashboards for your owners that's shown to them every single day, that's updated every single day, that tells them how have we been doing, and what can we do to make our business even more successful going forward. And then it also aggregates like a news feed to tell them what are the latest trends. As a small business owner, what are the things that you care about? And then we see going forward later on that we could possibly do, financing or like supply management, toothbrushes, toiletries, all that stuff, and then have that as an entry point as a touch point to help our owners even more, and also may allow OYO to expand its business in the long run. So that's one side. The other part is actually about the hotel managers and the front desk, right? So we want to, in order to help both the owner and the customer more, we need to make sure that the front desk and the hotel managers know how to do their jobs, right? How to make their jobs more efficient, and then like how to help them improve along the way, right? So we have built a process-oriented and tool-oriented app that basically we give to both the hotel operators, managers, and the front desk to give them a checklist of what you should be doing every single day. Also give them tools to say, what are the data that you care about, and what are the particular tools that can help you manage this hotel better, right? So those are kind of the things that we provide. Of course, we have a long way to go. Right now, these are more like processes and tools, but in the future, the vision, of course, is to incorporate more AI and to incorporate more AI into the system, such that the hotel managers can have more input into how they're doing, and then the front desk can just be told what to do at different times of the day, or the operators can just be told what to do instead of having to think for themselves. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think point you touched upon is at the end of the day, it is a two-sided market. You're bringing together hotel suppliers as well as the guests. So in that way, it sounds very similar to Uber, where you have this software connecting drivers and riders, and you think about the entire driver, think about how to fulfill their needs in order to supply your users. But at the same time, OYO's approach is because they want to standardize and put on their branding, it is more operationally intensive, similar to what Mobike is like, because Mobike is not really a two-sided market. So I'm curious, why do you think this mixture of bridging together two markets but being a little more operationally heavy is the right way to penetrate the Chinese market? For example, on one hand, you can say you can go pure OTA and just have another platform where you bridge hotels and users, or you can go, hey, I'm just going to build hotels from 0 to 1 and just start from scratch.
We chose this because there's already a lot of OTAs in China providing some experience, some pretty well experiences, right? But we chose our particular business model because, one, we felt like the market is huge, right? Not that we felt like the market is huge, but the fact is that the market is huge. 95% of all hotels in China are non-chained, right? Are not chained hotels. And all of these hotels have trouble with their occupancy rate, right? If you look at Zou Jia or Huazhu, they all have occupancy rate of 85 to 95%. But if you look at the hotels that chooses to work with us, they all have occupancy rate of 25 to 35%. So there's a huge gap that we want to help them bridge, right? So because of the business model that we chose to work on, because of the business model we chooses to tackle, that's all the operations and then the owner management, all that stuff came afterwards, right? So those are just the core capabilities we had to build in order to help these hotel owners. Yeah.
Got it. So who would you say are your closest competitors in your space?
We didn't have any close competitors up until earlier this year when our business just grew tremendously, right? At that point, we basically have, for example, Huazhu and some other players coming in with sub-brands or like with spin-offs that tries to compete with us. But their size is a lot smaller, and I mean, we also have a lot of things to learn from them, but they're still lagging behind in other areas.
Got it. I recall that the founder, Ritesh, has set OYO's goal to be world's largest chain by 2023, and you guys are in over 300 cities and I think over 300,000 rooms now, and it's over 6,000 hotels.
Yeah.
So like opening about like 40,000 rooms a month, which is ridiculously fast. It's the same kind of crazy growth, hockey stick growth you've seen at Uber China as well as at Mobike in China. And I'm curious, like what does it mean for the marketplace as a whole for these suppliers you're disrupting, and are there any adjacent industries that are being impacted?
So I think right now we're still very, very focused, right? Like even in the hotel industry, there are different models that we can build. Right now our model is very much like Didi, right? And it focuses on existing supply. Because of for example, I said 95% of hotels are still unchained. Because of the huge amount of existing supply, we want to help bring them onto our platform, and we want to, output our operational capacity and abilities to make them make their business better. But for example, some hotels will need more help in terms of just construction, right? And there are hotel owners who are stuck with this hotel, but they may want to do something else. So these are opportunities for us to buy out the hotel as a whole. So all these are different business models that addresses the same market. So we want to solve these problems first before moving on to other more different adjacent businesses. Right, so we're still very, very focused on our own business, like our core hotel business at this point.
So in China, blitzscaling is a norm. It's all about getting a large user base and understanding the consumer value chain and going after these adjacent markets. How has OYO, given your experience at growing Uber China and growing Mobike, what does that blitzscale and growth look like for you from the product and tech side?
So I think that's the question that keeps me up at night on a daily basis, right? So I think the key point which I have experienced both in Uber and Mobike is that how do you build a tech team that can support this kind of growth, right? And there are a couple of things that needs to be solved, right? One is the infra side, of course, right? You gotta make sure that your app doesn't go down. At least don't go down so frequently that people lose trust on you, right? And that's actually a very, very difficult problem to solve in itself. And when you have to solve it in blitzscaling, when your amount of traffic is growing or doubling every couple months or so, this becomes even harder. To build on top of that, because the business itself is growing so fast, you need to build a lot of different tools to help that business, to help other part of that business to grow, right? For example, in Mobike's case, and also in OYO, the supply is growing so fast. So you have to build the corresponding demand systems to catch up with that supply. And that means building features in app, right? Building connections with different OTA providers, and building tools that your salespeople can use, and also building tools that your operations people can use to manage that supply. So all that adds up to a very, very large number of tools and features and products that you need to build on a daily basis. And so finding a way to build a bunch of features really fast while keeping the system stable that can support this kind of traffic is really the hardest system. Is really the what makes this problem so hard, right? So we try to do a couple of things. So one, of course, you just gotta hire, and you have to hire good people who not only focuses on just building the features, but also have the vision of scaling this for the long term, right? So we have a couple of really good people from Alibaba who have seen this kind of scale and can build for that kind of scale, right? So I think getting some key leaders from really good companies is very, very important. And at the same time, you also need people to really buy into you and works very hard, right? So we have tried to hire a lot of young people who are very driven and very smart and eager to learn, and then have them work with our senior leaders to basically both build up the system, but also allows them to learn and scale themselves in a very fast pace. So that's the approach we take on the people side. And then on the technology side, we always try to use something that's very, very well established. We don't want to experiment new things because we simply don't have the time to, and we cannot afford to make mistakes. We cannot afford to 走弯路, right? Like take a roundabout towards certain approaches, because we just want to build this system up. And the third thing, which we haven't done previously at Mobike, but I'm doing today at OYO JiuDian, is to build up this middleware system, 中台, right? So I think the very interesting part here is that the backend, the infra, is something that usually changes very slowly, right? It's more rigid. But the front end, the features, the products I build evolve very, very quickly because your business model and your business itself is evolving very quickly. So you can imagine you have a very fast spinning gear running on the front, and you have a slow turning gear at the back. And so to bridge these systems, it actually creates a lot of friction. So what middleware tries to solve is to say, I'm going to abstract a lot of things from the features you're trying to build, and then use that as your middleware system. And then when your front end, when your products iterate, a lot of the stuff that you built previously can then be reused because they're abstracted, right? But this also creates a cost because abstraction is hard, right? So you need really, really good people, at least the leaders and architects, who can do this abstraction. And two, you need to manage all your stakeholders and let them buy into your abstraction such that they can live with having their features delayed, or not delayed, but waiting for their features for another week or two before they launch. But then knowing when they have a new feature coming in, it's likely that the time to delivery for the new features will be faster, right? So that's kind of the gist of the middleware, both middleware technology and middleware team that we're trying to build. And so far it has worked out relatively well. It also creates a lot of friction, like managing different stakeholders is difficult, and doing the right abstraction is difficult, and enforcing that abstraction across your engineering team is also difficult. But these difficulties we're tackling one by one, and it seems to be working out better and better, right? And we have seen time and again that when we don't do this abstraction, when we don't do this middleware, we actually end up spending more time to fix things later on, right? So that's kind of a key learning for me, or in the past 6 months.
Yeah, definitely some key learnings brewed up from 2 unicorn/hyper growth companies under your belt there.
Yeah.
I'm curious, you mentioned earlier that OYO JiuDian is called JiuDian to differentiate from OYO, and OYO's in a lot of other countries, Malaysia, and a couple of places in Southeast Asia, and I think recently maybe even in the US. How do you guys share learnings, share playbooks? Do you guys share any resources on the tech and product side, or is it wholly autonomous?
Actually, we try really, really hard to keep it autonomous, right? Our code base is entirely autonomous. We are not using anything from the global team, not because they're not doing well, not because we don't want to, because we try to move as fast as we can, right? So in China, like in Europe, you can wait for 2 weeks before making a decision. Yeah, maybe in Silicon Valley, you can wait for like 2 days. But in China, if you wait for a decision for more than 2 hours, then you might be late to the game, right? So just in order to have the kind of speed that China demands, we chose to, segregate these two tech stacks and tries to move as fast as we can. But having said that, we're actually starting to share some stuff. For example, the India team has built up a pretty interesting IoT product called OYO Switch that we're actually trying to help them implement in hotels in China, right? So there's definitely some crossbreed that's starting to come out, but due to the early stages, we're still just starting to do that. It hasn't been worked on at a scale as of yet. And our key interest is still to make the China business successful. So once we have once we're more stable on that front, then we'll be focused more on efficiency and knowledge sharing, etc. At a later stage.
I recall at Uber China it was pretty wholly separate from Uber core, and then at Mobike International was separated a bit from Mobike. Would you say this was the key learning from being at both of these China components of a company that keeping it autonomous, localizing even all the way down to the infrastructure level as quickly and to supply that growth as quickly as possible is the best playbook?
Yeah, totally. I mean, if you look at the Chinese companies that the foreign companies that have succeeded in China or has worked in China, it's either you have Amazon, who has almost completely failed because their decisions are made in a very complicated manner. They have to go to the headquarters, or you have Uber, which did better, right? Like still a lot of mistakes made. Still, it didn't have its own engineering team based in China, but at least they had it we had it in San Francisco to support the China business specifically. But still, the communication is still a bit long, right? And then you have OYO, which we chose to just be a Chinese company, right? All the C-levels are basically Chinese, and we try to focus on solving the Chinese problems with Chinese people the Chinese way. And I think that's a very, very important lesson.
What's one thing that you have learned about working at OYO China that's unique in this particular experience that you feel like a lot of people either in the West or coming from Mobike or Uber haven't experienced?
So the way I think about it is that every experience is going to be different, right? So Ray Dalio had this book about principles, right? So because every business is different and every opportunity is different, and because you are growing and changing, it's about like figuring a set of principles that really works for you to success in the long term, right? And to me, of course, there's a lot of like smaller principles, but there are a couple of like I guess big axioms that just never changes. And the first thing is like to be able to think deeply about problems and understanding their core, and just have the problem solving mindset on a regular basis for every single thing that you meet. I think that I started to have this mindset when I was at Uber working together with Travis, and really saw how he approached problems, how he saw like every challenge as just another problem to solve, right? That was eye-opening to me. And then the second thing is to just work hard, right? Especially in China, you just have to work. Not just you have to work hard, but not working hard, it's basically not an option in terms of being able to succeed, right? Because things move so fast. But to me, because every single opportunity that I had, I loved working on it so much. It was never been a problem. I just was doing it because I loved doing it. not because of something that people are forcing me to do. So I think I know it doesn't sound very interesting, but it sounds kind of boring. Everyone has to work hard and everyone has to understand problems and solve them. But at the end of the day, these are really the axioms that keeps coming back to time and again.
Yeah, and I think over the course of these three companies, you deeply reflect, there is no silver bullet. It does come through this routine hard work that you put into habit, and you kind of put yourself into that mindset.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for taking the time to share that and your current journey at OYO today with us. Thanks, Zou Jia.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks, Tim.